No tricks today. It's time for Halloween treats. Yes indeed, it's time for some Halloween cooking and baking. I'm more of a chef than I am a baker, but I'm doing a little bit of each today. In fact, I'm preparing two treats. The first is a Halloween skull-shaped cake. I mentioned in a previous video that I got this cake mold, or this cake pan, shaped like a skull from Amazon. It's a silicone thing. Hopefully it works well, so we're going to try that as sort of an experiment today. And then I'm also going to make stuffed pepper jack-o'-lanterns. Because the cake needs to bake for a while, I'm going to start with it first. As I mentioned, I'm not much of a baker. I'm a pretty good chef, but not much of a baker, so I'm just using a boxed cake mix for this. I am, of course, following the high altitude instructions, so I'm just going to mix all of those up. First thing we need, of course, is the cake mix itself, to which I add, again following the instructions on the box, 3 eggs. 2 tablespoons of flour, that's my high altitude concession. 1/3 of a cup of oil, and 1 cup of water. I have a feeling I'm going to need to do 2 of these cakes, but I'm going to start with 1 and see how far it goes. And as you can see, I've chosen a red velvet cake mix, which seems appropriate for a severed skull or severed head kind of a thing. I will be using a white frosting to make it look like a skull with bloody red velvet cake on the inside. And while I mix this up, my oven is of course preheating to 350 degrees as instructed. And that looks pretty well mixed, so that should be good. This is a silicone mold, so it shouldn't stick to anything, but I'm going to use just a little bit of cooking spray just to make sure, especially around the eyes and nose, that nothing gets stuck in the mold. And let's pour this in and see how far 1 box goes. We want this to almost but not quite fill the mold to give it a little bit of room to rise. I actually want it to rise a little bit past the mold, sort of a muffin top, and then I'll cut that off and make it all even. And indeed, 1 box of cake mix almost fills 1 side of the mold, so I'll just whip up another one of these and then I'll put it in the oven. Okay, those are full. I've put the mold on a cookie sheet just to keep it from wobbling all over the place in the oven. So now we're ready to bake. As I said, the oven is preheated to 350 degrees, so these are going to go in probably for about half an hour, maybe a little bit longer. And that's done. Hey Siri, set a timer for 20 minutes.
20 minutes counting down.
I will check that in those 20 minutes. And while that's in the oven, I'm going to get started on my stuffed pepper jack-o'-lanterns. Part of the stuffing is rice, so I have my uncooked rice and I'm going to get that started now. I'm going to begin by rinsing this. That'll remove some of the starch and make the rice better. Then that'll go into the pan. I don't have a rice cooker, so it'll go into the saucepan. And while that is cooking, I'll move on to some of the other ingredients. Okay, the rice is cooking, and while I was off camera, I took the liberty of mincing my garlic. And the important rule for garlic, as we all know, is you never follow the recipe. You just get some garlic and keep going until you hear the spirits of your ancestors tell you that's enough. Now I'm going to dice my onion. And the proper way to dice an onion is with some long strips running from head to tail of the onion. 1 good slice right down the middle, and then dice, just like so. And now we need to prepare these peppers. They're going to be carved to look like jack-o'-lanterns, so of course the first thing we want to do is take the top cleanly off and leave it intact. We're then going to take the paring knife and carefully clean out the insides. We want to get rid of all of the seeds and this sort of, I guess you might call it connective tissue on the inside, but being careful not to go all the way through the pepper. You may also want to take a spoon to help scrape some of that out. And if one seed gets left inside, it's not the end of the world, but you really want to make an effort to get rid of all of that. There's the base of one done. We also need to do the same thing with the top of these. Normally when you make stuffed peppers, you would just cut the top off and throw it away, but in this case we actually need the tops. And of course, it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, make sure that you get orange bell peppers when you make this recipe. You also want to make sure that when you get your orange bell peppers, you want to get ones that have a nice stem left on the top. It's just going to look better that way. And that's good enough for the top. You'll notice this part here where the stem connects is still tough and odd colored. You don't want to eat that part, but it's clean enough that you can serve this pepper. I'll do the rest of these while I'm off camera, but just to show you the next step, I'm going to carve a little pumpkin face into the pepper. Be very careful while doing this and just use your paring knife to cut the eyes and mouth out. And when you cut these out, you'll be left with these tiny little pieces of pepper. This is good pepper. You can eat that while you're cooking, you could throw it in the stuffing, you could save it for later, or you could throw it out. Personal preference. And do take your time to get these as good as you can. But of course they don't need to be perfect. Just make sure you don't nick your finger with the paring knife while you're doing so. Oh, time to check my cake. Still not quite finished, so I will carry on with what I'm doing. And there we go. There is one bell pepper jack-o'-lantern ready to go. I'm going to turn off the camera and make the other 5, and I'll return when I'm ready for the next step. Now that the peppers are all carved, we're ready to start making the stuffing. I'm going to heat up some oil in this pan. And then to that hot oil, we're going to add our diced onion. And we'll let that go until the onions soften. Just about a couple of minutes. This smells great already, but it's about to smell a whole lot better because the next thing to go in is our garlic. And along with the garlic, we'll add in about 2 teaspoons of tomato paste. And we'll stir this all together until nice and fragrant. And we add 1 pound of ground beef, and this just goes until the ground beef browns. While that's going, I'm also going to add 1 can, 14.5 ounces of diced tomatoes. You can use fresh tomatoes and dice them yourself if you want, but tomatoes are one of those wonderful things that you can just put in right out of the can. And while we're waiting for that to get its temperature back up, I'm also going to add 2 teaspoons of oregano. And then this just goes until the ground beef is browned. And while that's going, I'll add just a little bit of salt. And a little bit of ground black pepper. I may add more of that at the end after I've tasted, but that'll be good for a start. And now that that's almost finished, I'm going to add the rice that I cooked earlier. That's been sitting for a little while, so I'm going to have to break it up, but that's okay. And this is just about ready. I'm going to let it go for just a little bit longer to help blend all of those flavors together. Once that's done, the last step will be putting this stuffing into the pepper jack-o'-lanterns, and then those will just need to bake for a while. And it's looking pretty good. Let's do a quick taste test. Pretty good. Needs just a little bit more salt and pepper. Perfect. That is just how I want it. Now we can turn the heat off of this because it's ready to go. Okay, now I just need to stuff these peppers with the stuffing mixture that I just prepared. So all we're going to do is just spoon it down inside, mash it down a little bit to make sure they're well stuffed. Then they can go into the baking tray and their lids go back on. And we'll do the same process for all 6. Oh, and I almost forgot an important step. Before the lids go back on, they get just a little bit of cheese on top of each one, just for some extra flavor. And then the lids go back on. You don't need to be persnickety about keeping the orientation correct, but I am choosing to do so. And now these are ready to go into the oven. They bake at approximately 400 degrees for around half an hour or so. The way to be sure that they're done is just stick a fork in, and when the peppers are fork tender, then they're ready to go. So I'm going to pop these in the oven, and then I'll be back in about half an hour. And there they are, ready to come out of the oven. Looks like they came out great. Can't wait to try eating them. And now the cake is out of the oven, and it just needs to cool. I notice these molds didn't stay 100% level, so the batter sort of clumped to one end a little bit. I think it'll still be okay. It just didn't, muffin top quite as much as I wanted. I was hoping it would completely bubble over the edge, and then I could slice them even and put them together that way. It might mean a little bit more work this way, but I think it'll still be alright. In any case, these need to cool for a while, so I will come back and decorate these later. Assuming it works well, you will see the finished product. I am not going to film myself trying to separate these out and decorate them, so you'll just see the final product at the end. And there's the cake out of the mold. As you can see, it did stick to the pan a little bit just there. I think that's unfortunate, but that's something we can work around. So I think this still looks pretty good. I'm overall happy with this so far. Next step is just getting the 2 halves glued together with frosting and making it all look good and white and skull-like. And there's the cake finished. Far from perfect, but I don't think too bad considering I'm a non-baker and it was my first time trying this mold. Overall successful, couple little problems, but reasonably good. I'm happy with that as a Halloween cake. This side actually looks pretty good. If I spin it around, this is the side where it stuck to the mold a little bit and crumbled. So I repaired it as best I could, and I think it came out not too bad. Like I said, not perfect, but a fun little cake. I'm reasonably pleased with how that came out. Well, after a long day of baking and heading into another long day of other spooky business, it's finally time to just settle back with Dr. McCoy and a nice glass of wine. I have a cheeky little Merlot called Vampire, which for some reason just seemed appropriate. Not bad. I will admit, drinking wine out of plastic, or through a straw, and certainly both at the same time, is a big no-no in my book. And really, wine out of plastic is kind of horrible. But you know what? I will make an exception for the blood bag wine glass. So now, as I sip my wine out of a blood bag, let me ask you, as always, do me a favor and click the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, do all those things that every YouTuber asks you to do. It gets annoying to hear that request all the time, I know, but it really does help me out if you do so, so I'd appreciate if you did so. And until next time, take care and stay scared.